Welcome. This evening, we invite you to step away from the world of today and into the past, a past where marriage was not simply a personal union between two individuals, but a profound social contract that shaped the fabric of society. Picture, if you will, the soft flicker of candlelight and the muted sounds of a medieval village, its cobblestone streets still damp with the morning dew, the smell of fresh bread wafting from nearby bakeries. Here, in a world steeped in custom and faith, marriage was both a deeply personal commitment and a strategic societal necessity. In the world of the Middle Ages, marriage was something of great consequence, an institution deeply tied to both the church and society. A union between two individuals, yes, but far more than that. It was an arrangement that shaped the course of family legacies, political alliances, and economic survival. Love, as we understand it today, was often secondary. What mattered most were the responsibilities that came with the vows, the obligations that bound the couple not just to one another, but to their families, their community, and above all, to God. At the heart of medieval marriage lay the notion of duty to the family, to society, and to God. While modern marriages are often seen as a personal, romantic bond, medieval unions were frequently negotiated between families, shaped by economic, political, and even military considerations. For those in noble families, marriages were especially strategic, crafted to secure alliances, power, and wealth, while those of more humble means viewed marriage as a practical necessity, an essential means of ensuring survival, continuation of the family line, and support in times of hardship. In the medieval world, families were the cornerstone of society. It was within these families that marriage took on its deepest significance. The family unit was more than just a group of people. It was the means by which wealth, property, and even social status were passed down. Marriages between noble families were often arranged long before the bride and groom had even met, with the understanding that their union would benefit both families. In fact, in many cases, these unions were arranged even before the children were born. Such was the foresight that these families had. Marriage in this period was much more than a connection between two people. It was the binding of families, each seeking to secure their legacy. These arrangements were frequently made for pragmatic reasons: wealth, land, and the consolidation of power. Young brides were often little more than children, sometimes not even of marriageable age, and the grooms, in turn, were typically chosen not for their love of the bride, but for their ability to uphold the family's interests. For the nobility, this union was often about acquiring new territories or securing military strength. Marriages between royal families were particularly important. A marriage between two royal houses could forge alliances that would, in many cases, affect the fate of entire kingdoms. For the common folk, however, marriage was less about titles and more about survival. It ensured the continuation of the family line and the proper distribution of property. Though these unions were less grand, they were no less significant. Marriage, too, was considered a holy sacrament in the eyes of the Church, a divinely ordained bond. In medieval Europe, the Church held a great deal of power, and it was the Church that provided the spiritual framework for marriage. To marry without the Church's blessing was considered an act of defiance, and marriages conducted outside the Church's scrutiny were viewed as illegitimate. The ceremony itself was a deeply sacred event. A priest would oversee the vows, and the couple would pledge their faith and loyalty before the congregation. The vows exchanged between the couple were not merely words, but a sacred promise, a commitment made not only to each other, but to God. In the eyes of the Church, the marriage was a reflection of divine order, and once the vows were spoken, the couple was considered bound by God's will, their union as permanent as the heavens above. Marriage in the medieval world was as much about societal stability as it was about love. Though it may seem foreign to our modern sensibilities, it was a time when personal desires were often secondary to the needs of society. Marriage was a social contract that was meant to strengthen the bonds between families and the fabric of the larger community. It was through marriage that inheritance, property, and power were passed down, and family names were preserved. Marriage, in its purest sense, was a tool of survival for the medieval family. The exchange of property, land, and titles through marriage was a means by which families ensured their future. It was not uncommon for families to arrange marriages based on the benefits they could provide, not just in terms of material wealth, but also in the form of political alliances. Marriages between royal families, for instance, could be instrumental in securing peace between warring kingdoms. For the peasants and the working class, marriage was less about power and politics, and more about necessity. A young couple marrying in the countryside might not have the grand festivities of a royal wedding, but their union was no less significant. In fact, marriage was a fundamental part of their existence, a means by which they could survive and thrive. In rural communities, marriage was about the continuation of the family line, the securing of land, and the ability to share the burden of work. Though peasants did not have the luxury of grand dowries or elaborate celebrations, the bond of marriage was still vital. In fact, it may have been even more important to them than to the nobility. A marriage provided a sense of stability and support. The family was the foundation of society, and the work that a couple did together was essential for their survival. In this way, marriage became not only a social contract, but also a partnership of shared labor, love, and trust. Now let us turn our attention to a practice from the medieval world that might seem both curious and intimate: hand fasting. A tradition that differs significantly from what we think of as marriage today. Hand fasting was, in its essence, a temporary, yet deeply meaningful union. Picture, if you will, the soft glow of a fire in a quiet village, the sound of wind rustling through the trees as a couple stands before their loved ones. Their hands are bound together by a simple, yet significant cord or ribbon. They make their vows, not for life, but for a fixed time, and with the understanding that, at the end of this period, their union might either continue or dissolve. It was a practice that reflected the fluidity of relationships in a world where permanence was not always expected or desired. In medieval Europe, marriage was not always a permanent bond. While many marriages were formal, structured, and intended to last a lifetime, there existed a fascinating contrast: hand fasting, a temporary contract that allowed a couple to come together for a period of time, sometimes a year, sometimes longer, before making any permanent commitments. The origins of hand fasting are uncertain, but it appears to have been practiced across various regions of Europe, particularly in Scotland and England, and was seen as a union that offered the chance for people to live as married couples without the formality of a church-sanctioned ceremony. Hand fasting was, in essence, a symbolic and public declaration of a partnership. The ceremony was simple, unadorned, yet powerful. The couple would stand before witnesses, family members, friends, and often the local community, and in front of them they would pledge their love and commitment to one another. But instead of exchanging rings, the couple's hands would be tied together with a cord, ribbon, or cloth. This act of binding was not just a gesture, it was a promise, a visual representation of their connection. As the cord was tied, the couple would speak vows of fidelity, making promises to one another for the duration of their temporary union. These vows were often no less serious than the promises made in a more formal, permanent marriage. It was understood that the couple would live together as if married, sharing household duties, raising children if necessary, and forming a life together. But at the end of the agreed period, either party could choose to dissolve the union, and both were free to seek out new partners if they so wished. Hand fasting served many purposes in the medieval world. For some, it was a way to test a relationship before committing fully to marriage. In times when marriages were often arranged by families, hand fasting allowed for a kind of trial period, a time to determine whether the couple was truly compatible. For others, it was a practical solution to the lack of formal ceremonies. In remote villages or rural communities where access to clergy was limited, hand fasting provided a way for couples to bond without needing an official marriage sanctioned by the church. Hand fasting was, in many ways, a practical solution for those living in rural or remote areas. The process of hand fasting allowed couples to establish a union without the need for a church ceremony, which was not always readily available. While the church would eventually claim jurisdiction over marriage, for centuries, hand fasting existed as a widely accepted practice outside the formal structures of religious authority. It allowed for a couple to declare their union and live as a married couple, without the formalities and expectations that came with an official church wedding. The nature of hand fasting itself is what makes it so intriguing. While marriage today is often thought of as a lifelong commitment, hand fasting was a temporary union. In many ways, this practice reflected the impermanence of life itself. Nothing in the medieval world was guaranteed to last forever. Land could be lost, fortunes could be stolen, and alliances could crumble. In the same way, a hand fasting union was fluid. It existed for as long as both parties chose to maintain it, and at the end of the time agreed upon, it could end, with neither party bound by vows or contracts any longer. Some couples chose to renew their vows and continue the union for another period of time, while others might part ways amicably. In this way, handfasting reflected a level of freedom and autonomy that permanent marriages did not offer. It was a relationship based on mutual respect and choice, but it did not carry the weight of lifelong commitment. It allowed people to experiment with their unions and their personal choices, an early form of what we might call modern-day dating, but with deeper cultural and familial implications. Some couples chose to renew their vows and continue the union for another period of time, while others might part ways amicably. In this way, handfasting reflected a level of freedom and autonomy that permanent marriages did not offer. It was a relationship based on mutual respect and choice, but it did not carry the weight of lifelong commitment. It allowed people to experiment with their unions and their personal choices, an early form of what we might call modern-day dating, but with handfasting held social and cultural significance beyond the couple involved. It was a public declaration, an acknowledgement from the community that two people were joined in a bond, even if it was temporary. The ceremony was often performed in the presence of family and friends, and sometimes even the local villagers, creating a sense of shared responsibility and community. Though the union was temporary, the ties between the families and the community were strengthened, and the bond between the couple was celebrated with as much joy and reverence as a more formal marriage. While handfasting was widely practiced, it was not without its controversies, especially as the power of the church began to grow. In the eyes of the church, a union that was not sanctioned by religious authority was considered illegitimate. As the church solidified its control over marriage in the 12th and 13th centuries, handfasting began to lose its official recognition. Yet, despite the growing influence of the church, handfasting continued in many parts of Europe, especially in areas where access to clergy was limited or where local traditions held strong. As we leave behind the tradition of handfasting, we carry with us the memory of a practice that allowed individuals to live out their relationships in a way that was deeply personal, yet still connected to the greater fabric of society. It was a ritual, too. Had balanced love with practicality, freedom with responsibility. In a time when few things could be guaranteed, the temporary union of handfasting allowed people to explore the possibilities of love, partnership, and community without the finality of traditional marriage. And perhaps, in some small way, it reflects something about the human condition itself, our search for connection, but also our understanding that nothing in life is ever truly permanent. As we journey deeper into the fabric of medieval life, we turn our attention to a practice that may seem strange to us today, the bride's price. Picture, if you will, a quiet village nestled in the countryside, the air thick with the scent of freshly baked bread, and the soft murmur of a market in full swing. Amidst the bustling life, one event stands out, a marriage negotiation. But this is no ordinary exchange. It is a moment when value is not only placed on the union of hearts, but also on the wealth and security it promises. In this quiet ritual, the bride's worth is carefully considered, quantified, and symbolized through a price, which might be paid in wealth, land, or goods. The concept of the bride's price is one that transcended social classes, though it took different forms depending on status and location. For the noble and royal families, the bride's price could involve vast sums of money, land, or property, items that carried great weight in the negotiations. For the common people, the bride's price was less formal but no less important. It was a way of symbolizing the bride's worth, both to her family and to the groom's family, who would take her into their fold. At its core, the bride's price served several functions in medieval society. It was not, as some may think, a purchase of the bride, but rather a form of security. It provided financial assurance to the bride's family, guaranteeing that they would not be left without support if the marriage ended prematurely. It also signified the groom's commitment to the marriage and his ability to provide for his new wife. In a time when the future was uncertain and life could be short, such an arrangement provided both a measure of security and a guarantee of the couple's intentions. Unlike the modern understanding of dowries, where the bride's family offers wealth to the groom, the bride's price was a payment made by the groom or his family to the bride's family. This price could take many forms. It could be paid in livestock, in land, or in the form of a monetary gift. While the amounts varied greatly, especially between different regions, the principle remained the same. The groom's family was expected to provide for the bride, and the bride's family was compensated for the loss of their daughter. Beyond the transactional nature of the bride's price, it also held deep symbolic meaning. In a society where family and property were often intertwined, the bride's price was a recognition of the importance of marriage as a means of consolidating property, securing alliances, and ensuring stability. It was a symbol of commitment, of both the groom's devotion to the bride and his family's intention to take care of her in the future. The exchange of wealth was also a demonstration of the groom's ability to provide, not just in material terms, but in his capacity for stewardship and responsibility. For the bride's family, the bride's price was a way of ensuring that their daughter would be well cared for in her new home. It was not uncommon for families to ask for a substantial price, particularly if the bride was seen as particularly skilled, beautiful, or capable of managing the household. A bride's price could also be seen as a reflection of her family's standing in the community, a way of asserting their worth through the value of their daughter. The bride's price took on different forms depending on the social class of the couple involved. For the nobility, the transaction could be complex, with a dowry included alongside the bride's price. The groom would often offer land, estates, or the promise of military support in exchange for the bride's hand. These marriages, particularly among royal families, were more than just personal unions. They were strategic alliances designed to cement political power and wealth. For the common folk, the bride's price was a more straightforward exchange. It could be as simple as the payment of a few cows or sheep, or even a sum of money that was agreed upon by both families. Yet even in these humble arrangements, the practice still carried great significance. The groom's family would pledge to care for the bride, and the bride's family would be assured that their daughter would be provided for should the union not work out. Though the practice of the bride's price was not a church-sanctioned institution, it was not unusual for religious leaders to be involved in the process. The church had a vested interest in marriage, considering it a sacrament that reflected divine order. As the church grew in power throughout the Middle Ages, it began to regulate marriage more closely, yet the bride's price still remained a practice in many regions, even if it did not fall directly under religious authority. The church, however, did not fully embrace the bride's price. With the rise of Christian marriage as a sacrament, the idea of buying a bride was deemed morally problematic. The idea of a price attached to marriage began to wane, though it persisted in many parts of Europe, especially in the rural regions where traditional customs held strong. Over time, the concept of the bride's price evolved into what we would now recognize as the dowry, a practice that, though similar, had its own distinct religious and social implications. The bride's price had a profound impact on the social fabric of medieval life. It was an institution that reinforced the social hierarchies that governed the medieval world. The amount of the bride's price often reflected the status of the bride's family. A high price could indicate wealth, power, and social standing, while a lower price might suggest poverty or lesser status. This system reinforced the concept of marriage as an economic transaction, a means by which families secured their place in society. Marriage, in the medieval world, was never just a personal bond. It was an exchange of promises, of goods, of social standing. The bride's price, though often viewed through the lens of tradition, was an essential part of this system. It symbolized a commitment, both spiritual and material. It was a symbol of the care that would be provided, of the promises made, and the weight of the social contract that defined medieval unions. As we leave behind this practice, we are reminded that in the world of the Middle Ages, nothing was ever truly simple. Even love and commitment, at their most basic level, were shaped by the structures that governed society. Marriage in the medieval world was not merely a ceremonial bond between two individuals. It was a profound commitment that extended into the very heart of the home. And in the heart of that home, lay the bridal bed, a space both sacred and intimate, where two lives would begin their shared journey together. The bridal bed, often the most important piece of furniture in a medieval household, was not just a place for sleep. It was a symbol of the marriage itself. It represented the physical and spiritual union of husband and wife, the foundation of their new life together. In the Middle Ages, marriage was more than just a social contract. It was a sacrament, and the bridal bed was seen as a sacred space. This was the place where the couple would begin their life together, and it was often blessed by the priest, a ritual that imbued the room with divine significance. The act of consummation, too, held great importance. It was the moment when the union was made real, and the sanctity of the marriage was fully realized in the eyes of both the church and the community. The bridal bed was often adorned with fine linens, embroidered tapestries, and other valuables. It was not merely a piece of furniture, but a symbol of the couple's new life and responsibilities. In some cultures, the bed was consecrated by a priest, who would bless it as part of the wedding ceremony. This act was meant to ensure that the marriage would be fruitful and that the couple would find happiness and harmony in their union. The bridal bed, while intimate, was also a public symbol of the couple's new role in society. It marked the beginning of their shared life, and its sanctity was understood by everyone in the community. The couple's first night together in the bed was not just a personal experience, but a moment that reflected the union of two families, the joining of wealth, status, and lineage. It was through this act of consummation that the marriage was sealed, not just in a spiritual sense, but in a social one as well. The rituals surrounding the bridal bed varied from region to region, but many shared common threads. In some cases, after the wedding ceremony, the bride and groom would retire to their bedchamber, where they would be joined by close family members. The couple was expected to consummate the marriage that very night, and the first act of physical intimacy was seen as an important step in ensuring the marriage was legitimate. In certain regions, the bed was watched over by a watcher, a trusted member of the family or community, who would stand guard and ensure that the act of consummation was completed. In some communities, a special ritual followed the wedding night. The next morning, the family would gather to celebrate the completion of the marriage. A sheet that had been placed on the bed was often examined for signs of the couple's union. The presence of blood on the sheet was seen as proof of the marriage's consummation, and it would be displayed for the family and community to see. This was an important custom, as it not only confirmed the couple's bond, but also assured the bride's family that their daughter had been properly received into the groom's household. For royalty and nobility, the bridal bed took on even greater importance. The marriage of a prince or princess was often a matter of national concern, and the consummation of the marriage was of utmost significance. Royal marriages were not just about love or companionship, they were political alliances, crucial to maintaining the strength and unity of kingdoms. The bridal bed was, in many ways, the stage upon which these alliances were solidified. In royal households, the act of consummation was often overseen by trusted attendants or even a physician who would report on the couple's physical union to ensure that it had taken place. The first night in the bridal bed was of paramount importance, for it marked the creation of heirs, those who would continue the royal line. For royalty, this bed was a political tool as much as it was a personal space. While the bridal bed was certainly a place of physical intimacy, it was also a space laden with emotional and psychological significance. For many couples, the wedding night was a time of nervous anticipation. Young brides, especially, often had little understanding of what would transpire in the bedchamber. The idea of intimacy was both sacred and mysterious, and it carried with it a weight of expectation. The bride, in particular, was often taught from a young age that this space was not just a physical union, but a spiritual one. The bed became a place where a woman's purity and honor were reaffirmed in the eyes of her family and society. While it was expected that the bride would have a role in welcoming her husband, it was equally understood that the couple's relationship would evolve over time. The bridal bed, as intimate as it was also a place where trust, affection, and partnership would be developed. The quiet hours spent together, the moments of tenderness and understanding, would shape the course of their marriage. As with many traditions in the Middle Ages, the importance of the bridal bed evolved over time. As the influence of the church grew, the private aspects of marriage were increasingly regulated, and the rituals surrounding the wedding night began to diminish. By the late medieval period, the idea of the bridal bed as a sacred space began to fade. The marriage became less about the first night and more about the long-term union. Yet the symbolism of the bridal bed as a foundation for the marriage remained intact. The bridal bed, in its quiet grandeur, reminds us of the sacred and transformative nature of marriage. It was not simply a place for physical union, but a space where new lives were created, both literally and figuratively. It was a symbol of commitment, trust, and the start of a shared life. In the Middle Ages, this sacred space marked the beginning of the couple's journey together, a journey that was as much about faith and community as it was about love and personal connection. On the surface, the wedding ring is a simple object, a circle of gold or silver that adorns the finger of a married person. Yet in the medieval world, the ring was much more than just a piece of jewelry. It was a symbol, a physical manifestation of vows spoken in sacred spaces, a promise of permanence in a world filled with uncertainty. The wedding ring carried with it the weight of spiritual significance, a reminder that marriage was not just a civil contract, but a divine union, binding the couple in the eyes of both God and society. Throughout history, the exchange of a wedding ring has symbolized a commitment that transcends the physical. It represents the eternal nature of marriage, the promise of love and fidelity, and the bond that, once formed, cannot be easily broken. But this tradition, like so many others, has its roots deep in the past. In the medieval period, the wedding ring was not just a token, it was an embodiment of the vows taken, the unbroken circle of life and faith, a symbol that marriage, in its truest form, was meant to last for eternity. Though the wedding ring was a familiar part of medieval marriage ceremonies, its origins can be traced back to ancient civilizations. In Egypt, for instance, the circular shape of the ring symbolized eternity, the endless nature of life, death, and the afterlife. The idea of the wedding ring as a token of eternity and permanence became a central theme in European marriage practices during the medieval period, though the tradition itself was not universally practiced. In early medieval Europe, wedding rings were often simple in design. They were usually made from iron, a metal symbolizing strength, and sometimes from more precious metals like gold or silver. The ring was not always worn on the finger as it is today, but rather on the thumb, signifying strength and authority. It was common for a man to wear a ring as a symbol of his commitment, but for a woman, it might not always be a customary part of the marriage ceremony, depending on the region. As Christianity spread across Europe, the wedding ring took on additional significance. The Church viewed the exchange of rings as a sacred moment in the marriage ceremony, a symbol of the commitment not just between two individuals, but between the couple and God. In this context, the ring was seen as a reflection of the eternal nature of God's love, a love that bound the couple in unbreakable unity. The ring was not merely a symbol of love, it was a symbol of fidelity, of the promises made before God. In the eyes of the Church, marriage was a sacrament, and the exchange of the wedding ring was an act that reflected the couple's faith and their pledge to one another. The ring was worn as a constant reminder that the couple was bound not just by earthly ties, but by a sacred, divine covenant. During a medieval wedding ceremony, the exchange of rings was one of the most sacred moments. The couple, often dressed in their finest attire, would kneel before the priest, and the priest would bless the rings, symbolizing the divine nature of the union. The bride would wear the ring on the fourth finger of her left hand, a tradition believed to have originated from the ancient Egyptians, who believed that the vena amoris, or vein of love, Ra, and directly from this finger to the heart. This custom, though simple, held profound meaning. It was not just a gesture of love, but a reminder that the marriage was a union blessed by God. The act of placing the ring on the fourth finger was a sacred ritual, signifying that the couple's hearts were forever connected through their vows, their faith, and the love they had promised to one another. As time passed and the Middle Ages gave way to the Renaissance, the wedding ring began to evolve both in design and significance. No longer was the ring merely a simple band, it became a more intricate symbol of status and wealth. For the noble classes, wedding rings became elaborate pieces of jewelry, often adorned with precious stones. Sapphires, rubies, and diamonds would be used to embellish the rings, making them not just symbols of love, but also symbols of wealth and power. While the designs of the rings may have changed, the symbolism remained. The precious metals and stones were seen as representations of the eternal nature of the marriage. Gold symbolized the strength and endurance of the bond, while diamonds and other gemstones were believed to reflect the purity of love. The wedding ring, now a beautiful and intricate piece of art, continued to carry the same sacred significance it had held for centuries. In the medieval world, a wedding ring was not just a personal token. It was also a reflection of the social contract that marriage represented. For the nobility, the exchange of rings during a wedding ceremony was a public declaration of their union, witnessed by family, friends, and even political allies. The wedding ring was a sign of the bride and groom's commitment, not only to each other, but to their families, their communities, and their shared futures. For the common folk, the exchange of rings, though less ornate, still carried the same weight of meaning. It was a public declaration of their vows, a bond witnessed by their community. The ring, though perhaps simpler in design, was a cherished symbol of the commitment they had made to one another and the life they would build together. Today, the wedding ring remains a powerful symbol of love, commitment, and faith. Though its design has evolved, its symbolism has remained unchanged. The ring continues to serve as a reminder of the vows spoken, the promises made, and the eternal bond that ties a couple together. Just as it did in the medieval world, the wedding ring is a token of permanence, a reflection of the couple's love, and a symbol of the sacred union they share. As we leave behind the wedding ring of the medieval period, we carry with us the understanding that the simplest of symbols can hold the deepest meaning. The wedding ring, worn by countless generations, continues to bind people together across time, space, and history. It is a symbol not only of love, but of faith, commitment, and the unbreakable bond between two souls. After the vows were spoken, the promises made, and the rings exchanged, the couple, in the medieval world, would embark on a new chapter of their shared life. But the wedding, as sacred as it was not only a private affair. It was a communal celebration, a moment for families, friends, and entire villages to come together, marking the union of two families, the strengthening of alliances, and the joyful beginning of a new journey. And what better way to celebrate this union than through the graceful movements of the first dance? The wedding dance, a ritual as old as marriage itself, was a moment of great importance. In the medieval world, it was not just a joyful occasion. It was a declaration of unity, of shared purpose, and of the first step into the lifelong journey ahead. The first dance was more than an expression of joy. It was a symbol of the couple's new status, their commitment to one another, and their place within the wider community. In the Middle Ages, dance was an integral part of all major celebrations, and weddings were no exception. However, unlike the boisterous and fast-paced dances that may come to mind today, the medieval wedding dance was often a slow, dignified, and deliberate affair. It was not about spectacle or speed, it was about connection, both between the couple and their community. The dance was performed in front of friends and family, and every movement carried significance, reflecting the solemnity and joy of the union. At its core, the wedding dance was a communal affair. It wasn't just about the bride and groom, it was about the community coming together, sharing in the couple's happiness, and recognizing the importance of the union. In many ways, the dance was a ritual act that reaffirmed the bonds between families, communities, and even nations. The guests would join in after the bride and groom had danced, each participating in a joyous celebration that united everyone present. The slow, graceful movements of the first dance were deeply symbolic. The circle of dancers that often followed the bride and groom represented the interconnectedness of the couple's lives. Each step they took was a reflection of the journey they would share, the challenges they would face, and the love that would sustain them through it all. As the couple danced together, they were not just moving in harmony with one another, they were also moving in harmony with their faith, their families, and the community around them. In many cultures, the first dance was considered a sacred moment. It marked the beginning of the couple's physical union, and it was a reflection of the vows they had just taken. In a time when words were often seen as fragile, the language of dance was more enduring. The couple's movements were a tangible representation of their commitment, their love, and their shared future. It was through this dance that they communicated the promises they had made, to care for one another, to support one another, and to face life's challenges hand in hand. For royalty and nobility, the first dance held even greater significance. The marriage itself was often not just a personal union, but a political alliance. The first dance, in these contexts, symbolized the forging of new ties and the continuation of dynastic power. The couple's movements were watched not only by family and friends, but by courtiers, nobles, and sometimes even ambassadors. The dance was not just a moment of joy, it was also a display of power, authority, and control. The nobles and royals who danced on the first night of their marriage did so in the full view of their court. The dance was not only a public display of their love for one another, but a demonstration of their ability to unite powerful families, secure alliances, and continue their lineage. The guests would watch closely, knowing that this dance symbolized not just the beginning of a personal journey, but the forging of powerful political ties. While royal weddings had their own grandeur, the wedding dance for common folk and rural communities was more intimate, yet no less significant. For the peasants, the first dance was a quieter celebration, but it still carried deep meaning. The couple, dressed in simple garments, would take to the dance floor, joined by family and close friends. The music, though more humble, still filled the air with joy, and the dance was a shared experience, one that reflected the unity and support of the community. For the common folk, the first dance was more than just a celebration of love. It was a reflection of their collective lives. It was the community coming together to support the newlyweds, to offer their blessings, and to reaffirm the bonds that held them together. The dance itself became a symbol of the shared responsibility that would guide the couple throughout their lives. The first dance also played an important role in uniting the families of the bride and groom. In a time when marriages were often arranged to strengthen familial bonds, the dance served as a ritual of reconciliation and connection. As the couple danced, their families watched, and in many ways their dance was a reflection of the new relationship between these two households. The wedding dance, whether it was performed in a grand hall or a simple village hall, was a powerful symbol of union. It was a shared celebration of love, faith, and community. Through the gentle rhythm of the dance, the couple not only expressed their joy, but also their commitment to one another and to the life they would build together. It was a ritual that transcended the boundaries of class, culture, and status, and it continues to be a beloved part of wedding celebrations today. After the vows, the rings, and the first dance, the marriage celebration reaches its grand conclusion, the wedding feast. In the medieval world, the feast was not just a time to eat. It was a time for family and community to come together in joyful union. The table, laden with food and drink, was a symbol of abundance, prosperity, and the shared bond between the bride and groom's families. The wedding feast was both a ritual of celebration and a display of the couple's new life together. It was a moment for friends and family to gather, to share in the joy of the newlyweds, and to reaffirm the bonds that tied them all together. The wedding feast was often the most lavish part of the entire ceremony. For the nobility, it could be a grand affair with elaborate dishes, fine wines, and an abundance of food. The scent of roasted meats and freshly baked bread filled the air, and the laughter of friends and family echoed through the halls. Yet, despite the grandeur, the focus was not on excess. It was on the communal act of sharing. The feast, though rich in food and drink, was also rich in meaning. It was a time to honor the union of two families, a time to celebrate not only the couple, but also the community that surrounded them. In medieval Europe, food was more than just sustenance. It was a symbol of life itself. The wedding feast was no exception. It represented the abundance and prosperity that the couple hoped to share in their life together. But it was also a time of spiritual significance. Meals in this context were an expression of the communal bond that existed between the couple and their guests. To break bread together was a symbolic act of unity, a ritual that bound everyone in attendance to the promises that had been made. At the heart of the wedding feast was the idea of abundance. It was a celebration of life, of food, of family, and of the future. The abundance of food symbolized the hope for a fruitful and prosperous marriage. It was a wish for the couple to share many years of happiness and good fortune, supported by the love and community that had gathered to witness their union. The rituals surrounding the wedding feast varied from region to region, but certain elements remained constant. The first course was often a hearty soup or stew, shared by all in attendance. This humble dish was a symbol of the couple's shared life and the work that lay ahead. After this, the feast would move to richer fare, roasted meats, pastries, fruits, and wine, all consumed with a sense of reverence for the occasion. Each dish served had its own meaning, reflecting the different stages of the couple's journey, from the humble beginnings of their shared life to the bountiful rewards that came with the success of their union. At the center of it all was the bride and groom, seated at the head of the table, surrounded by their families. Their seats were often elevated, symbolizing their new status as a married couple. The meal was often served in courses, each course more extravagant than the last, culminating in the final offering, a dessert or sweet wine to close the meal. This progression of food mirrored the couple's journey, beginning with simplicity and humility, and ending with joy and celebration. Food in the medieval world was rich with symbolism, and the wedding feast was no exception. The bread in particular was of great significance. As the staff of life, bread symbolized sustenance, security, and family. To share bread was a sacred act, one that united the couple and their families in a common bond. Similarly, the meat served at the feast symbolized abundance and the promise of prosperity. The wine, often drunk in copious amounts during medieval feasts, represented the couple's shared joy and the union of their hearts. Together, these elements created a harmonious and meaningful celebration. While the wedding feast was a time of celebration for the couple and their families, it was also a time for alliances to be strengthened, for the nobility, and the feast was not only a personal occasion but a political one. Guests were invited not only for the joy of the event, but also for their role in furthering the family's interests. These feasts were opportunities for negotiation, for discussing future alliances, and for cementing political power. The bride and groom, as the hosts, had an obligation to maintain the peace and ensure that the festivities ran smoothly, but there was also an underlying current of diplomacy. The wedding feast was as much about securing the future of the family as it was about celebrating the union of two individuals. For commoners and those of more modest means, the wedding feast, though less extravagant, was no less meaningful. It was a time for families and friends to come together in joy, to celebrate the couple's new life with whatever food and drink could be mustered. While the feast may not have been filled with the rich delicacies of the nobility, it was still a moment of connection, a shared experience that brought everyone together in the spirit of unity and joy. As the feast draws to a close, the guests grow quiet, their bellies full, their hearts content. The evening begins to wind down, but the significance of the meal lingers. The wedding feast was not just a celebration, it was a moment of unity, a shared experience that bound the bride and groom, their families, and their communities together. As the last course is served and the final goblets of wine are raised, the feast becomes more than just a meal. It becomes a lasting memory, a moment of collective joy that will echo through the lives of all those present. After the wedding feast has ended, the guests have departed, and the music has faded into the quiet of the night. The bride and groom retreat to a space that holds the deepest significance of all, the marriage bedchamber. This room, more than just a place of rest, is where the couple's new life truly begins. It is here that they will seal their union, not just physically, but emotionally, spiritually, and socially. The marriage bedchamber was a space that embodied the hopes, promises, and responsibilities of marriage. It was here that the future of the couple's relationship would be shaped and where the sanctity of their vows would be made real. In the medieval world, the marriage bedchamber was more than just a place for physical intimacy. It was a sacred space. In many cultures, it was consecrated before the couple slept in it for the first time. This blessing, often performed by a priest, was meant to ensure that the marriage would be fruitful and that the couple would be blessed with love, happiness, and children. The bed, the space, and the act itself were imbued with spiritual meaning, marking the beginning of a new chapter in the couple's life, one that was not just personal but deeply connected to the community and to God. The marriage bedchamber symbolized the private, intimate side of the union, but it was also a reflection of the public nature of marriage. In medieval Europe, marriage was not solely a private matter between two people. It was a public social contract that involved families, communities, and even political alliances. Yet, in the bedchamber, the couple found a private space where they could begin to cultivate their life together, where they could share moments of quiet intimacy, and where the true nature of their relationship would unfold. This space was sacred, not just for the couple, but for their families, who viewed it as a symbol of the marriage's success or failure. The bedchamber also symbolized the couple's shared life. Just as the marriage was a union of two families, the bed was a space where the couple's private world would begin. Here, the bride and groom would learn about each other, discover their strengths and weaknesses, and forge the intimacy that would bind them for years to come. In medieval society, intimacy was often viewed as something sacred. It was a vital part of the marriage, necessary for procreation, and integral to the couple's bond. The act of consummating the marriage was not just a physical act, but a spiritual one, confirming the legitimacy of the union. For many medieval couples, the bedchamber represented purity, both spiritual and physical. The act of consummation was seen as the final, necessary step in making the marriage official. It was understood that the first night together was important, but it was not just the physical consummation that mattered, it was the spiritual connection that was created in that shared space. The bed was viewed as a holy place, and the couple's first night in it was a sacred occasion, marking the beginning of their new life together. Before entering the bedchamber, many medieval couples would be given a blessing from a priest. This act of consecration was meant to purify the space and ensure that the union would be fruitful. The bed was not just a place of rest, it was a place of creation, where the couple's future would unfold. It was in this space that children would eventually be born, and the family's legacy would continue. The bed was thus not just a physical object, but a sacred space that reflected the couple's role in continuing their family line, in fulfilling their social and spiritual obligations. On the first night, as the bride and groom retire to the bedchamber, there is a sense of anticipation, of uncertainty, and perhaps even fear. Many brides, especially in rural or less affluent areas, were not given the opportunity to understand fully what would happen. They had been taught the social and spiritual importance of the marriage, but the actual experience of intimacy was a mystery. The night itself was often accompanied by a mix of nervousness and excitement. The couple was not only physically becoming one, but emotionally and spiritually beginning their shared life. Once the couple enters the bedchamber, the door is closed behind them. The room becomes a private space, a sanctified area where their union will be consummated. For the medieval couple, this act was seen as a crucial part of their marriage. It was not simply about physical pleasure. It was about fulfillment of their vows, about completing the ceremony and ensuring that their union was legitimate in the eyes of God. For the couple, the bed was a place where love and faith were interwoven, where their commitment to each other and to the marriage was sealed. Medieval society placed great emphasis on procreation. The marriage bed, therefore, was not only a space for intimacy, but also for the creation of new life. The act of consummation was directly tied to the idea of family and the continuation of the family line. For many couples, the birth of children was not just a personal joy, it was a societal expectation. It was the fulfillment of one's duty as a married couple, and it solidified their position within the community. While the marriage bed was a place of intimacy, it was also seen as a sacred space that held spiritual significance. In the medieval world, marriage was regarded as a sacrament, and the bed was where that sacrament came to life. The couple's union was blessed not just by the priest who officiated the ceremony, but by the sanctity of the space itself. The bed was consecrated and the space was imbued with the divine presence, making the couple's first night together a holy act. As the couple settles into the bedchamber, the soft glow of candlelight flickers against the stone walls. The bed, simple yet sacred, becomes the foundation upon which their future will be built. Their journey together has only just begun, and the quiet space of the bedchamber will be where their lives unfold. It is a beginning, a quiet and sacred moment, one that will echo through the years to come, as they share their hopes, their dreams, and their love in the space where they have truly become one. After the sacred vows are exchanged and the first dance is danced, after the bride and groom retreat to their bedchamber and the wedding feast has come to a quiet end, there is a final, significant aspect of marriage that lingers in the hearts of the couple, their families, and their community: the creation of new life. In the medieval world, marriage was not only a union of love, respect, and duty, it was also a partnership meant to continue the lineage, preserve the family name, and ensure the survival of the community. The marriage bed, in this sense, was more than just a place for intimacy. It was a sacred space where new life would be conceived, where the future of the couple's family would begin. In the eyes of medieval society, the purpose of marriage was deeply entwined with the necessity of procreation. For many, the physical consummation of the union was not just a private act between two people, it was a public duty, an obligation to the family and society. The bedchamber, then, was not only a place of personal connection, but a place of creation. It was here that children would be born, inheriting not just the family's name, but its values, its land, and its future. In the eyes of the couple, their shared moments here symbolized the fulfillment of their societal and familial obligations. Children in the medieval world were not just seen as the natural consequence of marriage, they were seen as the fulfillment of marriage's purpose. The medieval marriage, especially among nobility and royalty, was not simply about personal connection or even love. It was about ensuring the continuation of the family line. For the common folk, while the desire for children was still deeply important, it was also tied to the practicalities of farming, inheritance, and survival. Children were seen as a blessing, but also as workers, heirs, and carriers of the family legacy. From the moment of their conception, children were seen as vital to the future of the couple's family. Their arrival in the world was not just a moment of joy, but a continuation of the parents' legacy. The birth of a child, especially the firstborn, was seen as a confirmation of the couple's union, a sign that their marriage was legitimate, fruitful, and blessed by God. The act of procreation was sacred. It was through this act that the family's line would continue, and with it, their social standing and responsibility within the community. The marriage bed, in this sense, was not just an intimate space, it was a place of creation, a holy space where life was brought into the world. In the Middle Ages, it was widely believed that the bed was a sacred space, consecrated not only by the couple's vows, but by the act of creating new life. The bed, once a symbol of the couple's shared life and physical intimacy, became the cornerstone of the family. Here, in the stillness of the night, a couple's love could bring forth future generations, ensuring that their family's legacy would live on. Creating life was not simply an act of nature, it was a divine blessing. In medieval thought, marriage and procreation were closely tied to the will of God. A couple's ability to conceive was seen as a direct reflection of their faith, and the creation of new life was regarded as a sacred act. The marriage bed then became a space where the couple's spiritual and physical commitments were intertwined. It was here that the couple fulfilled one of the most important duties of marriage, the bringing forth of children, the continuation of their lineage, and the fulfillment of the marriage's divine purpose. For many couples, especially those of noble or royal blood, the pressure to conceive was immense. A marriage that did not result in children was seen as a failure. Not just personally, but socially. A childless marriage was often regarded with suspicion, and in some cases it could even lead to the dissolution of the union. The failure to conceive was viewed as a sign that the couple's vows had not been truly fulfilled, that the family line would end with them. For those in royal courts, the need for heirs was particularly urgent. Marriages were often arranged specifically to secure political alliances through the production of heirs. The creation of children was thus not only a personal desire, but a political necessity. For the common folk, the pressure to conceive was not just about family legacy or political alliances. It was about survival. Children were essential to the work of the household. The arrival of a son meant someone to work the fields, to carry on the family name, and to protect the family's future. A daughter, too, was seen as important, for she could marry and secure alliances that might improve the family's standing. The family depended on these children, not just for labor, but as a future for the household. In a world fraught with danger, disease, and hardship, the family was both a unit of survival and continuity, and children were the lifeblood of that survival. In the medieval world, the creation of children was also viewed through a deeply spiritual lens. The church played an important role in regulating marriage and procreation. Children were considered a blessing from God, and the couple's ability to conceive was often seen as a direct sign of divine favor. However, the church also stressed that the purpose of procreation was not solely for the pleasure of the couple, but for the continuation of the human race in accordance with divine law. The act of conceiving was not to be taken lightly. It was a sacred responsibility, and the couple's role in the creation of life was part of a larger divine plan. While the couple's love and commitment were the foundation of their marriage, children were the living testament to that bond. They were the legacy of the union, the physical manifestation of the vows that had been taken. In a time when mortality rates were high, children represented the couple's hope for the future, hope that their family's name would live on, hope that the values they had instilled would be passed on to the next generation. As the couple lies together in the bedchamber, the first steps of their life are taking shape. The marriage bed, once a place of private union, becomes the space where new life is brought into the world, where the couple's legacy is created, and where the future is woven together. In the quiet of the night, as the couple rests, the promise of children and the continuation of their family line lingers in the air, a sacred duty fulfilled. While the marriage itself is a deeply personal bond, in the medieval world, it was also a public event. Marriage was not just a private union between two individuals. It was a ritual witnessed by the community, an event that brought families, friends, and neighbors together to affirm the bond. The act of marriage, much like the first dance or the wedding feast, was a communal celebration. It was not only the couple that celebrated, it was the entire village, town, or court that shared in the joy, the promise, and the future of the newlyweds. The community, in many ways, was as much a part of the marriage as the bride and groom themselves. In the medieval period, marriage was considered a public act, one that tied individuals not just to each other, but to their families, communities, and even to the larger fabric of society. A marriage was not just a personal commitment, it was a social one. The couple's union affected everyone around them. The bride and groom were bound not only to each other but to their families, and their vows were seen as a promise not only to themselves but to the people they lived among. The community, therefore, was an active participant in the marriage, and their role was both celebratory and affirming. One of the most important aspects of medieval marriage was the role of witnesses. In a time when written contracts were rare, the presence of witnesses was crucial to the legitimacy of the union. The community members, whether family, friends, or even strangers, gathered together to observe the vows. Their presence was more than a formality. It was a testament to the bond being formed, an outward confirmation that the marriage was true, sacred, and recognized. These witnesses would not only attend the ceremony, but they would also play a role in the couple's life together, offering support, guidance, and at times accountability. While marriage was a sacred act, it was also a social contract. The community's role as witnesses was a vital part of this contract. They were not merely passive observers. They were participants in the creation of a new family. In rural settings, the community would often assist the newlyweds in their first days together, offering food, labor, and support. In larger towns and cities, the marriage was a public spectacle, where the union would be celebrated not only through the ceremony but through the sharing of goods, the giving of blessings, and the offering of support for the couple's future. In medieval society, the idea of individualism was far less pronounced than it is today. People lived in tight-knit communities where the actions of one person affected the lives of many. Marriage was a way of securing alliances, strengthening relationships, and ensuring the survival of families. The community, therefore, had a vested interest in the success of the marriage. In many ways, the couple's future was tied to the well-being of the community around them. The social bond formed through marriage had far-reaching consequences, not just for the couple, but for the wider society. In rural communities, marriage was a particularly significant event, for the success of a marriage often meant the survival of the family. A couple's ability to work together, to produce children, and to contribute to the community's well-being was essential. The bride and groom were not just individuals, they were part of a larger social contract. Their marriage was a promise not just to each other, but to their families and the community. In this way, the community's role in the marriage was both supportive and essential. Of course, the family played a central role in the medieval marriage. Parents, siblings, and extended family were the ones who arranged many of these unions, negotiating terms and establishing alliances. The wedding itself was often a reflection of the family's status, wealth, and power. For the bride and groom, the marriage was not just a union of love, it was a union of families, and this was reflected in the way the ceremony was structured and the way the community was involved. Throughout the medieval period, family was the cornerstone of society, and marriage was one of the key ways that families ensured their survival and success. Parents often arranged marriages for their children, not only for love or affection, but for political, social, and economic reasons. In this context, the role of the community as witnesses to the union took on added significance. The couple's marriage was not just their own. It was a bond that tied two families together and often their respective communities. The ceremony itself became a public declaration of this new relationship. In larger towns and cities, marriage was a public event that brought together not just families but entire communities. The wedding ceremony itself was often a grand affair, with feasts, dancing, and celebrations that lasted for days. The entire town might be invited to the feast, where food, drink, and entertainment flowed freely. It was an opportunity for the community to show their support for the couple and to celebrate the union as a whole. In this sense, marriage was not just a personal or familial event, it was a communal one. The larger the community, the more public the celebration. A noble wedding, for instance, might include elaborate feasts and festivals that drew people from neighboring towns, not just to witness the union, but to partake in the festivities. These celebrations were a way to reinforce the bonds between families, communities, and even nations. It was not just about the couple, it was about the interconnectedness of everyone involved. The community, as a witness to the union, was not only celebrating the couple's bond, but affirming the sacred nature of the marriage itself. The act of witnessing the vows, sharing in the joy, and participating in the feast was a way for the community to show their support and commitment to the couple. Marriage, after all, was not just a personal relationship. It was a bond that carried with it responsibilities, expectations, and obligations to those around the couple. As the wedding celebration winds down, and the newlyweds prepare to begin their journey together, the role of the community remains a constant presence. Marriage, in the medieval world, was not a private bond between two individuals. It was a union of families, a reflection of social ties, and a responsibility to the community. The presence of witnesses, the support of the family, and the participation of the wider community were integral parts of the marriage process. The union was not only witnessed by those in attendance, but it was strengthened by their involvement, by their collective commitment to the future of the couple. Marriage in the medieval world was often viewed through the lens of duty, tradition, and social expectation. Yet, behind the rituals, the vows, and the public celebrations lay the deeply personal and emotional journey that each couple embarked upon. Love, in its many forms, was woven into the fabric of this journey, though not always in the way we understand it today. The medieval marriage was not simply about passion or romantic affection. It was a union based on mutual respect, shared responsibility, and at times, sacrifice. It was a commitment that required resilience, patience, and above all, a sense of duty to both the other person and to the family and community. Unlike the romanticized marriages of today, where love is often seen as the central force that holds and unites, altogether, the medieval marriage was more complex. Love was certainly a part of it, but it was often seen as a gradual, evolving force. In the beginning, marriage was often arranged, sometimes long before the couple had even met. The expectations were clear. The union would bring together two families, secure alliances, and produce children. But what happened after the wedding ceremony, after the vows had been spoken and the rings exchanged? What of the emotional journey that followed, the day-to-day reality of living together, learning to love and understand one another in the face of the world's challenges? In the early days of marriage, especially for those in arranged unions, love often had to be cultivated. For many couples, love was not something that arrived instantaneously. Instead, it grew over time, built on respect, shared experiences, and a deep understanding of the responsibilities they carried. In the medieval world, love was often seen as something that developed with time through the shared efforts of husband and wife. It was a steady and enduring force, not a fleeting moment of passion. The emotional journey of marriage was one that required patience, understanding, and a willingness to support one another through life's trials. For many couples, this slow development of love was part of what made the marriage so meaningful. It was not about grand gestures or dramatic moments. It was about the small, everyday acts of kindness, the shared responsibilities, and the gradual building of trust. The love that developed was a steady, unspoken understanding, often forged in the fires of hardship, sacrifice, and mutual care. In this way, marriage in the medieval period was not just a social contract. It was a personal journey of growth and connection. Marriage, especially in the medieval world, required sacrifice. It required the couple to set aside personal desires and ambitions for the good of the family and the community. For women, marriage was often a transition from their father's household to their husband's, a shift in status and responsibility. For men, marriage was not just about securing love or companionship. It was about securing an heir, ensuring that their family's name, land, and property would continue. Both parties, in their own way, made sacrifices, sometimes small, sometimes profound, for the sake of their union and their family's legacy. These sacrifices were not always easy. For many medieval couples, particularly those of higher social standing, there was an inherent tension between personal desire and duty. The man might long for companionship and love, but his duty was to secure an heir, to uphold his family's reputation, and to manage the land. The woman, too, might have desires of her own, but she was often expected to fulfill the roles of wife, mother, and homemaker. Yet, in the midst of these sacrifices, something profound often grew. The shared experience of giving to one another, of working together to build a life, helped create a bond that was as enduring as it was quiet. The emotional journey of marriage was not always easy. Hardship, loss, and challenge were frequent companions. Whether it was the struggles of raising children in a world where infant mortality was high, the strains of financial difficulty, or the pressures of managing a household, the challenges faced by a married couple were often immense. Yet through these difficulties, commitment was forged. It was in these moments of adversity that the true strength of the marital bond became clear. Commitment in the medieval world was often tested by these hardships. A marriage could be shaken by illness, by loss, by the pressures of societal expectations, and by the struggles of daily life. Yet, despite these challenges, the bond that held a couple together remained strong. Commitment in this sense was not just about the good times. It was about perseverance, about weathering the storms together, and about finding strength in the shared journey. Love, sacrifice, and commitment, these were the foundations of medieval marriage. The emotional journey of marriage was about much more than the initial vows and promises. It was about the daily choices to support one another, to care for one another, and to endure together. It was about the small acts of love, the shared moments of understanding, and the quiet sacrifices that went unnoticed by the world, but were felt deeply in the hearts of the couple. Through sacrifice, through hardship, and through the steady growth of love, marriage in the medieval period was an enduring commitment. The emotional journey of marriage was not always easy, but it was always meaningful. It was a partnership that required effort, trust, and above all, resilience. And as the years passed, the couple would find that their bond, strengthened by shared struggles and victories, had become something far greater than they could have imagined at the start. It had become an enduring testament to their love, to their sacrifice, and to their unwavering commitment to one another. As we leave behind the quiet moments of marriage, we are reminded that love in the medieval world was not always a fiery passion or a grand romantic gesture. It was a steady, evolving journey, a journey marked by both joy and sacrifice, by moments of connection and times of hardship. And yet, it was in this journey that true love was forged, not in moments of perfection, but in the quiet endurance of commitment. Marriage in the medieval world was far more than a union between two people. It was a fundamental pillar of society, deeply woven into the fabric of both personal lives and the community at large. While the first days of marriage were filled with joy, vows, and the start of a shared life, it was in the long years that followed that the true impact of the marriage was felt. Through children, through property, through alliances, and through the duties they upheld, the legacy of a medieval marriage extended far beyond the couple themselves. It was an enduring bond that shaped future generations and left its mark on the world in subtle yet significant ways. Marriage in the medieval world was not just about love or companionship. It was a strategic partnership, one that carried with it responsibilities to family, to land, and to legacy. The union was a cornerstone upon which much of society was built. It shaped the future of not only the individuals involved, but of their children, their communities, and even the larger world around them. The legacy of a marriage was written not just in the hearts of the couple, but in the lives of those who came after them. In the medieval period, family was everything. The concept of legacy was tied to the family name, land, and reputation. Marriage, particularly among the nobility, was the cornerstone of this legacy. When a noble family married, it was not just the couple who benefited, it was their entire line. The joining of families through marriage created alliances that could endure for centuries, strengthening dynasties and securing territories. The children born from these unions were seen not just as heirs, but as the continuation of the family's legacy. The success or failure of a marriage could impact the future of entire regions. Through marriage, alliances were formed that shaped the political landscape of medieval Europe. Royal marriages, for example, were often the most strategic, sealing political deals and creating peace between kingdoms. The legacy of these unions stretched beyond the immediate family, impacting the fate of entire nations. The marriage between a prince and princess could determine the course of a war, the strength of an empire, or the survival of a kingdom. In this sense, marriage was not just a personal union, it was a tool of power and influence. For the common folk, marriage was similarly important in terms of legacy, though it often revolved around the continuity of land, property, and household. When a young couple married, it was not just a joining of hearts, it was a merging of labor, resources, and responsibilities. Children, who would eventually inherit the land, ensured the continuation of the family's work. The marriage bed, then, was not just a place of intimacy, but a space where the future of the family's survival was created. The birth of children, particularly sons, meant that the family's holdings and land would be passed down to the next generation, ensuring stability for years to come. The idea of inheritance was central to the medieval marriage. The passing of property from one generation to the next was tied directly to the success of a marriage. The couple's children, particularly their sons, were expected to inherit the family farm, business, or holdings, continuing the work that had been started by their parents. The legacy of the marriage was built not just on the family name, but on the tangible inheritance of land, tools, and resources. For the common folk, this was their wealth, and the legacy of their marriage was felt in the continued success of their household. Children were, in many ways, the most tangible expression of a marriage's legacy. In the eyes of medieval society, children were not just individuals. They were the continuation of a family's name and heritage. The importance of having children, especially male heirs, could not be overstated. For the nobility, a marriage that produced no children was often considered a failure, as it meant the family line would end. For common folk, the birth of children was equally important, as they ensured that the labor force would continue and that the family's name would endure in the community. For many couples, the arrival of a firstborn child was the moment when the legacy of their marriage was truly solidified. The birth of a child brought with it the promise that the family's name, land, and work would continue. It was a reminder of the purpose of marriage, not just for personal happiness, but for the greater good of society. The legacy of a marriage, through the creation of children, ensured the survival of both the family and the community. While the personal journey of marriage was marked by moments of joy, struggle, and intimacy, the impact of that marriage often reached far beyond the couple. Medieval marriages were not just about individuals. They were about the families they formed and the communities they helped sustain. These unions shaped the future of entire regions, creating social, political, and economic structures that would last for generations. The children born from these unions carried forward the legacy of their parents, not only through the inheritance of land and property, but also through the continuation of family values, traditions, and societal roles. The legacy of marriage, then, is not just about what happens in the immediate years following the ceremony. It is about the long-term impact that a union has on the world around it. The children, the property, the alliances, and the values passed down through generations become the lasting imprint of the marriage. Whether in a small village or a royal court, marriage was the foundation upon which the future was built, shaping not just the family, but society itself. As the years pass and the children grow, the marriage that began in the quiet of the bedchamber and the joy of the feast continues to echo through the generations. The legacy of that union, the children, the land, the alliances, becomes a part of the community, of the world. And as the couple grows old together, their legacy remains in the lives of those who carry forward their name, their values, and their love. For in the end, the true impact of a medieval marriage lies not just in the vows spoken, but in the lasting mark it leaves on the world. As we close this journey through the world of medieval marriage, we reflect not only on the past, but on the lasting impact these unions have had through the ages. The customs, beliefs, and structures that defined medieval marriage were more than just practices of their time. They were the building blocks of the family, society, and the very social contract that shaped the world. The legacies left by these unions resonate today in ways both obvious and subtle. Though the world has changed, the concept of marriage has endured. The bonds of love, duty, and legacy remain as relevant as ever. Medieval marriages were shaped by necessity, duty, and faith, yet they carried with them an emotional depth that transcended the historical context. Today, marriage may look different in many ways based on individual choice, romance, and equality. But at its core, it remains a union that binds two lives together, just as it did in the medieval period. While we may no longer have arranged marriages in the way they were practiced in medieval Europe, we still see the echoes of these ancient traditions in the ways we structure our unions today. Marriage remains a central institution in modern life, whether it is a personal choice, a legal contract, or a spiritual bond. In a world that has evolved, marriage still signifies love, commitment, and the beginning of a shared journey between two people. Many of the rituals we associate with marriage today have their roots in medieval traditions, from the exchange of rings, to the wedding feast, to the presence of witnesses at the ceremony. These customs have evolved over time, but their core meanings remain intact. These traditions were not only symbolic, they were practical, spiritual, and societal. The bond formed in marriage in the medieval world extended beyond the couple to the families and communities around them, just as marriage today has wide-reaching effects, strengthening not just the couple but the larger community. In medieval times, marriage was not just a personal bond, it was a social institution, a cornerstone of society. Families were shaped by marriage, land was passed through marriages, and entire political alliances were formed through unions. Today, while the importance of marriage has shifted, it remains a fundamental institution that shapes family structures, inheritance, and social networks. The importance of marriage as a public act, whether it's recognized by the state, the church, or society, remains a reflection of the deep need for human connection, unity, and shared purpose. Perhaps the most enduring lesson from medieval marriage is the idea of legacy. In the past, the legacy of a marriage was often measured in children, land, and alliances. Today, legacy is seen in many forms: family traditions, values passed down, and the impact one's life has on future generations. Marriage continues to be an expression of love, sacrifice, and commitment, and its legacy is carried forward not just by children but by the stories, traditions, and values that each couple creates together. As we reflect on the medieval marriage and its place in history, we realize that it has shaped much of the world we live in today. The marriages of the past have left an indelible mark on family structures, on community relationships, and on how we understand love and commitment. But beyond the rituals and customs, the true legacy of marriage is the enduring connection between people, a connection that transcends time, geography, and history. And in this, we see that marriage, in all its forms, remains one of the most powerful forces in shaping our lives, our societies, and our futures.